American schools generally teach a conventional story about the meeting of pilgrims and Indians that finished with an amazing dinner. The end. But there's more to the tale. This video will explain the events around the first Thanksgiving and how it's not the image ingrained in tradition. At the start of the 17th century, southern New England was home to a variety of busy communities within several confederations. These were the people of the first light, and they called their home the Dawnland. Political leaders were known as sachems and had been trading with Europeans for over 100 years before the Pilgrims. Relations soured only after deceitful Europeans kidnapped locals to sell as slaves. Permanent European settlement was impossible due to the already high population of native occupants. But in 1616, tradesmen introduced a disease to the Dawnland, whose inhabitants died in droves from a lack of immunity. In 3 years, up to 90% were wiped out in several confederations, including the Wampanoag. Their head sachem, Massasoit, was aware of how close they were to being subjugated by their unafflicted enemy, the Narragansett. He was determined to save his people from such a fate. This was the political world the Pilgrims were about to enter.
I asked Dr. Bradley Russell to help me look for clues among the Mayapan ruins. Not only did people here fear the deadly snake god Kukulkan, they also built a monument to him in the very center of Mayapan.
Wow, look at that. This is the Temple of Kukulkan. It's also called El Castillo, the castles. And it's a monument to the feathered serpent, to Kukulkan.
The largest temple in all of Mayapan was dedicated to the Kukulkan.
It's really the beating heart of Mayapan.
According to legend, Kukulkan, the feathered serpent god, gave mankind laws. The ruling families got their power from Kukulkan, who symbolized the divinity of the state, and served as a messenger between the kings and the god. But like all Mayan gods, he required sacrifice. So this is the sacrificial location?
This is. Essentially, they would be spread out backwards over the stone, and that would expose their chest so that they could get underneath the sternum and pull out the heart that way.
Here, like in public?
It's always public. But it's also really important to understand that they were a way for the state, or in this case, a particular lineage, to show their power to the people and to remind them who was in charge.
At this time, a great civil war was raging in Mayapan. The rulers used public sacrifices as a show of force and displayed bodies all over the city. What story does this scene tell?
Decapitated. So you can see you have this niche. And when we excavated this, they found skull fragments and mandibles.
So this entire temple would have been covered with scenery of sacrifice.
Yes, absolutely.
Again, an obvious show of power from the Mayans here.
Right.
How long did Mayapan last?
Mayapan was around from 1100 to 1450.
350 years of death that ended with drought, war,
Rebellion. So this is the crematory.
Crematory as in people were cremated in here?
It was packed with burnt human bone all the way down to bedrock.
They burnt them here, they decapitated them there, they took their beating heart out of their body right there. It's quite brutal.
It is.
And very much a show of power.
If you want to assert your authority over a population, over an entire peninsula,
Kill them in multiple different ways.
It's an effective way to do it. If you want to assert your authority over a population, over an entire peninsula,
Kill them in multiple different ways.
It's an effective way to do it. Assert your authority over a population, over an entire peninsula.
Kill them in multiple different ways.
It's an effective way to do it.
None of these is anywhere close to the human remains that we found in the cenotes.
No, the Saquayam collection looks very different.
Is that why you believe that the cenote human remains were not sacrificed?
Yeah, you just don't see the evidence for it there the way you do in other very clearly sacrificial deposits.
This city is pretty much just a big graveyard.
Literally is the graveyard.
If those bodies aren't sacrifices, then what are they doing in the cenotes? The cenotes provide water, so why would anyone dump bodies in the water source? A battle for power was raging. Could it have been an act of war to spoil the water on purpose. We know that disease and viruses contributed to the collapse of the Maya. Poison and other forms of biological warfare have been around for centuries. As far back as 590 BC, Athenians poisoned the water supply of their enemies. And during the Middle Ages, Genghis Khan used plague-infested bodies as weapon against his enemy. And if these cenotes are connected, contamination of water could have spread all over Mayapan. Is it possible that the plague that brought down the Maya was spread intentionally? Bradley, I have a question.
Yeah?
Are the cenotes connected?
They're connected by water.
So all the cenotes are connected under the ground?
Yes.
This is what I'm thinking. What if those bodies inside Saquayun were dumped there on purpose, deliberately, to poison the water as a part of the war?
I don't think the amount of contamination that you're dealing with in that situation would affect a city this size.
Unless there's more cenotes similar to Saquayun, hundreds of bodies that have been dumped there, to poison the main water source for the whole city.
What we know about the history of Mayapan, it wasn't epidemic disease that drove the political disintegration of this city. Nobody knows the source of those diseases.
There's a possibility here that we're looking at one of the first recorded attempts of biological warfare in this region.
Oh my God. Wait. This is a really strange cenote, but I don't see anything. Nothing. It's possible that I've gotten all this wrong. There's a skull there. It's a skull. That's definitely a human skull. There's a part of a skull here. They're everywhere. There's human bones everywhere. It's like a giant graveyard down here. There's everywhere. There's bones everywhere.
You are not going to believe what I found down here. As Mayapan fell, warring factions violently tore each other apart. I believe that they also used biological warfare. And this confirms that my theory could be true.
Melissa Mays says the ominous change in the water was particularly noticeable at bath time.
My youngest would tell me, Mom, it's yellow and it's a filmy, gross, foamy thing, and it would smell like open sewer. But we were being told we're still getting used to the new system. It's safe, it's okay.
But it wasn't okay. Far from it. Flint's tap water was laced with dangerous levels of lead. The state knew about it and did nothing.
The trouble began 2 years ago when the state decided to switch Flint from Detroit's drinking water to a new system. But the new system wouldn't be ready for 2 years. In the meantime, to save money, they switched to the Flint River water.
3, 2, 1.
That first decision turned out to be a mistake, as did nearly every step the state took after it. Michigan's Department of Environmental Quality shoulders much of the blame, what a preliminary task force report calls an abysmal public response. At the time, the state agency told Flint it didn't have to add an anti-corrosive agent to the water, saying it was not necessary until 2 6-month monitoring periods had been conducted. In other words, they were willing to wait a year to see whether the water was safe. All the while, highly corrosive river water flowed through the city's lead pipes, leaching lead and other dangerous metals into the water supply, and what came out of the tap in many homes was toxic. Almost immediately, residents started complaining. Their water was brown. Some people developed rashes, became sick. Early tests revealed fecal coliform bacteria. So the city and state officials added chlorine to the water supply and told people to boil their water. Both mistakes which can actually increase the level of lead.
I built this place with my tax money.
At city meetings, residents were repeatedly told the water was safe.
We found the worst lead and water contamination that I have seen in 25 years, and believe me, I've seen a lot.
Residents didn't find out about the lead until this man stepped in. Mark Edwards is a Virginia Tech researcher who tested the water early last year.
It was very scary to see the levels of lead that were hazardous waste levels of lead coming out of her tap water.
That's right. The lead levels in one home were so high, water from the tap could be considered hazardous waste. His testing led to this EPA memo, an interim report which was leaked last summer. It said the high levels of lead in the water were especially alarming because the state's water testing was flawed, so the true lead levels were probably much higher.
We were just waiting for the appropriate authorities to help Flint residents to enforce federal law.
When Flint's former mayor asked the EPA for more information, he was shot down, as you can see in this email exchange obtained by CNN. The EPA regional director writes, "The preliminary draft report should not have been released outside the agency, and that only when the report is revised and fully vetted will it be shared with the city." But that wouldn't happen until months later. Meanwhile, families were still drinking water poisoned with lead. The EPA blames the state, saying in a statement to CNN, what happened in Flint should not have happened, and that the EPA's ability to oversee was impacted by failures and resistance at the state and local levels. The state was continuing with its own mistakes, according to Mark Edwards, butchering a round of water testing. They not only tested the wrong homes, but altered the reports, eliminating tests from 2 homes that would have shown toxic levels of lead. The state says the changes were legitimate.
They fabricated a report that made it appear like Flint was passing the lead and copper rule with flying colors.
In the fall, the government admitted that there was lead in the water and Flint was switched back to Detroit's water supply. But it wasn't until earlier this month that the state of Michigan started bringing in bottled water and declared a state of emergency.
From swimming in Lake Allatoona. Now, toxic algae on the lake, it poses a deadly threat here, not only to pets, but to people too.
Right now, the water is being tested. CBS 46's Ayanna Crystal joining us live at Lake Allatoona. Another day here with what you need to be looking out for. Ayanna, you were here yesterday. New information for us today.
Well, Karen, we are in a waiting mode. I have reached out to state officials several times today, but the Environmental Protection Division has not released the results just yet. Now, they did come out here to Lake Allatoona yesterday to collect samples, and right now they are analyzing them. But they did tell me that they have never had reports of blooms here at Lake Allatoona. Now, testing is being done out here on the lake after a report of a dog dying this past weekend after ingesting blue-green algae, which can be extremely toxic, which happens if the algae has bacteria that occurs naturally in Georgia's freshwater lakes. However, according to the Environmental Protection Division, environmental conditions such as hot temps can allow the algae to bloom to high enough numbers that harmful toxins are produced. Now, harmful algae blooms often present in discolored water ranging from blue and bright green to red, brown, or white. Now, some blooms even smell bad. Now, we did speak to beachgoers today at Lake Allatoona, and they are a bit concerned.
It's really prominent in stagnant water bodies. So like ponds, lakes, especially coves and lakes, kind of like this is. But for a public swimming area like this that gets a lot of turbulence from swimmers and whatnot, I don't think the risk is that high, but it's definitely something to be mindful of.
All right, so people that plan on coming out here to the lake need to be on the lookout for water that seems a little off, abnormal. And this exposure to toxins would not nearly be from ingesting or from the skin. Now, symptoms will include skin rash, vomiting, diarrhea, or even coughing.